This episode is sponsored by Dr. Chrono by EverHealth, the #1 mobile all-in-one EHR. Built specifically for medical practices, Dr. Chrono includes an integrated feature that powers a seamless payments acceptance experience. Dr. Chrono Payments offers multiple ways for patients to pay as well as insurance credit card processing. As a Dr. Chrono customer, you can easily activate our fully integrated payment solution that will streamline your cash flow and help you get paid anytime from anywhere. Deliver the best patient experience with a fast and easy way to collect payments. Visit drchrono.com/payments. That's drchrono.com/payments to learn more about Dr. Chrono today. Direct primary care is an innovative, alternative path to insurance-driven healthcare. Typically, a patient pays their doctor a low monthly membership and, in return, builds a lasting relationship with their doctor and has their doctor available at their fingertips. Welcome to the My DPC Story podcast, where each week you will hear the ever-so-relatable stories shared by physicians who have chosen to practice medicine in their individual communities through the direct primary care model. I'm your host, Marielle Conception, family physician, DPC owner, and former fee-for-service doctor. I hope you enjoy today's episode and come away feeling inspired about the future of patient care, direct primary care.
Direct primary care is a labor of love and a dream come true for me, and in my opinion, a must for every patient out there. I am Dr. Kristen Dall-Winther of Birchwood Family Medicine, and this is my DPC story.
Dr. Kristen Dall-Winther is a Wisconsin native. Born and raised in Racine, she was the eldest of 4 children in her working-class family, which her parents led as a career firefighter and a quilt shop owner. She was called to medicine at an early age and graduated from the University of Wisconsin at age 20. After working for a quick year as a microbiologist, she began medical school at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health in 2000. She quickly came to learn that one's ability to create a trusting, open relationship with patients was paramount in being able to care for them well, and it was clear to her then that no specialty offered better reverence for that relationship than family medicine. Just before she graduated from medical school in 2004, she matched into her first choice of residencies, family medicine in rural Belleville, Wisconsin. It was there she fell in love with small-town medicine. Residency for her ended in 2007, after which Dr. Dall-Winther moved to La Crosse to start her practice at Mayo Clinic, where she would serve for 10 years. She became a patient herself when she was diagnosed with advanced sarcoidosis in 2015. 3 months later, after unexpectedly losing her father to metastatic lung cancer, Dr. Dall-Winther began to evaluate how she was spending her time, feeling an urgency to make the most of every day, and there began both a professional and personal healing that culminated in the birth of her direct primary care clinic, Birchwood Family Medicine. When she's not working, she enjoys spending time with her large family and is a big fan of her mini golden doodle Penny, Brandy Carlisle, her 30-some chickens, gardening, music, traveling, reading, and film. She opened Birchwood Family Medicine in June of 2021. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Dall-Winther.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful and happy to be a part of this community of innovators and visionaries.
It's definitely exciting to talk with another rural physician. So we will get into that, and we'll get into your community and where you are in the United States in your corner of Wisconsin. But I wanted to start with congratulating you on celebrating your 1-year anniversary of being open.
Thank you. Yes, just tonight, my family and I were talking about what we should do on Tuesday. I think Tuesday is the 1 year for us. So it's gone fast, and I'm thrilled to have survived and made it 1 year out.
Amazing. And here's to many more years.
Absolutely.
So when we were first communicating to get you onto the pod and to share your story, one of the things you had written was that you classified yourself as Mayo Clinic meets Dr. Quinn. And,
right.
and so I would love if you could share, in terms of when the audience hears that, what is the backstory behind that statement?
Yeah, you bet. It's funny. It came to me after more than one patient in this last year remarked, "You're like, oh my gosh, you're like Northern Exposure," after being here more than once and experiencing our care and just stepping into the clinic where I've got antique medical equipment around and pictures of mission trips like to Cuba back in medical school. And I thought on it after more than one person commented, and I thought, you know what, I am like Mayo Clinic meets Dr. Quinn. And I think back and those two kind of pieces come from, I was a physician at Mayo for 10 years, and I'm deeply proud of my work there and ever committed to the practice style that I developed and built while I was there, which I think is a very effective combination of evidence-based medicine with shared decision-making and minimally disruptive medicine. We got a chance, just having been there for 10 years, to learn about the Mayo brothers, and they were definitely pioneers at their time, and Mayo continues to be a pioneer on many fronts. But then at the same time, I grew up watching Dr. Quinn, and I think, as silly as it sounds, she played a role in me becoming a doctor and wanting to become a doctor. I idealized her creativity and unfailing dedication to her calling and her refusal to let the status quo define her. And Sully wasn't bad to look at either, if I'm being honest, but I was the first person in my family to go beyond college. Though I grew up hearing stories about a great uncle who reportedly was the first osteopathic physician in Michigan. And so when I chose medicine, I was gifted with his doctor's bag and his cabinet and all of its equipment and prescription pads and all of this from the early 20th century. And thankfully, and a lot of tools, which I'll say were kind of scary looking. And I was glad as I was receiving these items to know that we don't have to use them on patients anymore. But so, yeah, I do think that Birchwood Family Medicine is this beautiful combination of modern medicine and old school care.
To have those ties and to learn about them after or as you're in your journey in medicine, I think it's even cooler because you have that different perspective, being a person in medicine while learning about your medical training history that's woven throughout your family. But I want to ask, when I talk to rural physicians, it takes a lot to be a rural physician because you're so nimble. You have to be the social worker. You have to be the lactation consultant. You have to be the person thinking down the lines of a rheumatologist, all of the hats. You have to wear all of them. When you were growing up, not necessarily knowing at the time about this tie to the first osteopathic physician in Michigan, what were some of the seeds that were planted in addition to Dr. Quinn that really allowed you to become this rural family physician that you are today?
Great question. And it's funny you say other than Dr. Quinn, who of course is a fictional person, but there were real people along the way. I was lucky enough to be raised in a family where I grew up just knowing that you don't quit when you set out to accomplish something, and really believing that I could do anything that I wanted. I could accomplish anything I put my mind to. And I don't know where that came from other than just modeling after my parents. We grew up lower middle class, and my parents had to work for every single thing that they had. But I always just knew that the limits were not there necessarily. I could accomplish what I wanted to. And my grandma along the way always told me that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And at first I didn't really know what she was talking about, but as a young adult, I realized that she was absolutely right. And I've found that I've had to be squeaky ever since. I remember in medical school protesting, naive on the details, but protesting for everyone to have access to healthcare. And I've always focused on the whole person, the big picture. And in some ways, I think that perspective has failed me. When I was applying to medical school back in 1998, 1999, it was very formulaic. Like it was your GPA has to be this and your MCAT score has to be this. And they didn't really look at a whole lot else. And that was challenging. And then once I went through medical school, went through residency, was an attending, and somebody who felt that permission to speak up about what she thought was right, I've been told from the beginning that I'm too thorough. I dig too deep with patients. I'm not looking small enough. And when I've spoken up about the need for change, that I needed to be more demure and ladylike, and so despite all of that, though, there always existed this voice, inside of me that just knew that what I believed in, I could fight for. And I've always kind of gravitated towards pioneers in that way, people that were movers and shakers. And so in college, I remember the movie Patch Adams came out, and already at the time, I was 19 years old applying to medical school and already feeling frustrated with the business and the politics of medicine. And so that movie came out and I saw it and I was very moved. I remember I wrote him a letter and it was quite long being thorough, but it was quite long, and just kind of went on about how much I admired his work and I was in awe of what he was able to accomplish with his free hospital out in Virginia. And then spoke about my frustration, my fear that I wasn't going to get in because I put myself through school, and it was a very scrappy kind of way that all of it came together. And so, to my shocked delight in writing to him and asking for guidance as I was beginning to apply for medical school, he called me upon receiving my letter and left me some really encouraging just words. And then the very next day followed up with an autographed copy of his latest book and a handwritten letter. And we wrote back and forth for probably 5 years up until 2002, when I was in med school and I was finally able to meet him. I brought him to the University of Wisconsin to lecture to students as part of the Distinguished Lecture Series that the UW had. And then he did some special sessions for medical students and we got to have dinner and stuff. It was pretty awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible. And I just love hearing that also, because with your background, with knowing that what he was doing was in alignment with what you wanted to do in medicine, it's the perfect breeding ground for a DPC doctor, right? All of those seeds leading you to a place where once DPC is on your horizon, that you could easily make the jump because it's in alignment with what you're already doing. So
That's right. Yep.
I love that. Now, can you please share a little bit about what was your residency like and how did you use that training to develop your confidence to become a rural physician after residency? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you to Spruce Health for supporting the My DPC Story podcast. The ways we communicate have changed dramatically over the past decades, but technology and tools in healthcare have not kept pace. Patients want more access and digital convenience, as well as the ability to text their care teams. Care teams are inundated with more communication and rising expectations, but are still using tools and technology stuck in prior decades. Spruce Health created a solution for the tech-forward DPC practice by creating a communication product designed to serve both the patient and the doctor through intuitive HIPAA-compliant workflows, tagging, scheduled messages, and triage templates ready for use, whether you're on your phone or in the exam room. New users get 20% off for the first 12 months of a paid plan with code MARYAL20. That's MARYAL20. So check out Spruce Health today at sprucehealth.com or check out the link in the show notes.
Yeah, great question. So I went to residency at the University of Wisconsin, and they had at the time 4 kind of main clinics that you could choose from or apply to be a part of. And so I applied for and chose Belleville, Wisconsin. And for me, I really chose it because I felt like I was going to get a broad and very whole person education around how to care for people outside of school. And I was right in that. And so I was really lucky to be able to train there. You know, I was training with world-class physicians, professors at the University of Wisconsin, but at the same time was in this community that was probably 35-40 minutes outside of Madison. And so I learned how to evaluate patients, diagnose them, treat them without having advanced diagnostics or consultants at my fingertips. And as a result, I came out feeling pretty confident around having mastered the physical exam, making a preliminary diagnosis without immediately available test results, and then really looking at the whole person when structuring a treatment plan, often with really limited resources. A lot of patients in rural settings are more poor and they may or may not be insured. They may or may not have problems with very basic things like, do I have electricity? Do I have enough money for food? Can I afford the medication that you prescribe? And so it was a wonderful place to train. And outside of primary care itself, where this is really important, I think being in a rural setting, I really came away with 2 main beliefs that still are with me to this day. Number one being that it is easier to care for someone. And I find that you do make more quality assessments about what's going on if you know where somebody comes from. So the opportunity to take care of multiple generations within one family, I think is very important. And then also just the way in which being flexible, kind of being on your toes, remaining ready for things that may come into your door. And part of that flexibility may be in the things that you discover outside of your door. So whether that's doing home visits to better understand a patient's social determinants of health, or to really understand, risks that they may be at. As a city girl, originally, I had no idea that silo gases were something that were a risk to farmers and folks who live on farms and work around farms. And I wouldn't have known that had I not done a home visit and really kind of gotten to know the community in which I was practicing. So those were two huge parts that kind of came out of training.
And when you were in this journey and really harnessing that love for treating the whole person, treating the family as a generational unit, did you ever think about, could I do some locums in a rural situation and then do my main clinic in Madison or the big city? Versus, were you solid on your decision during residency that after residency you were going to go full rural?
Yeah, absolutely not. I would say I chose there to train, but I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, which is the third biggest city in Wisconsin, close to 200,000 people, I want to say, but it's third biggest city. I do know that. And so I was always intrigued with rural life and country life and rural medicine and all of those things. And I wanted to train in it so that I had the choice. But when it came time to finish residency, I was 27 years old and married with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I was looking at $165,000 in student debt and just bought a house for the first time. And so I'm really trying to figure out how to adult, and parent and do all of these things at the same time. And the stars weren't aligned at that time. And so right out of residency, I took a job with Mayo Clinic and primarily saw patients in La Crosse, although within the first couple of years of starting there, I took on some administrative positions, and that had me traveling to all of the Mayo sites, including Florida and Arizona, and spending quite a bit of time in Rochester as well. And so I did end up on a different path and away from rural medicine for about 10 years before life brought me back here.
Gotcha. And in terms of during those 10 years, did you have positions or assignments where you were in rural locations in those different states as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I lived in a rural area north of La Crosse. And so that was just part of my life, just being where we lived. And then I practiced in La Crosse, but a lot of my patients still lived in La Crescent, other smaller areas in Southeast Minnesota. There still were those considerations that I learned and had to come to know in residency that carried through. And then outside of my clinical work, I had two kind of main things. At Mayo, it was always about clinical practice, research, and teaching. And so there were a couple of different things on the administrative side, and to some degree the teaching side. I worked as the patient safety officer for all of the Mayo Clinic health system. So that was about 75 plus clinics, 17 plus hospitals throughout Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. And so, yes, many of those were rural. And so there was that piece in that work. I was advising on, investigating adverse events when they happened. And definitely there are always things to take into consideration when you're looking at patient safety, the further you get out from the hub where everything is accessible and reliable. And so that taught me some very important hallmarks when you're doing rural medicine, even though I wasn't practicing in that environment. The importance of really excellent communication, trying to maintain continuity as much as possible, having good referral relationships, all of those things, empowering your patients, educating them on what to expect, educating them that no news doesn't always mean good news, and that sometimes we do have to chase these things down, teaching them how to be advocates for themselves. All of those things were tried and true throughout all of these kind of areas and clinics that I would advise on. And so that definitely was there. And then my research at Mayo was largely around shared decision-making and minimally disruptive medicine. And that's not something that's unique to rural medicine or urban medicine. It's something that, in my opinion, we should all be striving for, really looking at partnering with the patient to make their medical decisions based on what is important to them and what's important in their lives. And then also really trying to have a good understanding as to the burden that it is to be a patient. Illness aside, symptoms aside, the burden of having to interact with our American healthcare system is significant. And we know that it significantly impacts actual disease, morbidity, and mortality at times. And looking at how can we serve our patients, help our patients, meet them where they're at, instead of shoving down their throats, this is the way we do things, and you'll have to adjust to meet our requirements and fit into our system, versus how can we mold our system to best meet your needs.
Absolutely. And having the autonomy to adjust to your patients as they need to is increasingly apparent that it is needed and it is missing in a lot of our healthcare. And such an interesting and unique perspective that has not been shared on this podcast in terms of thinking as a doctor, like we've said, thinking about the whole person, thinking about generational medicine, but then also in an administrative role that you had with evaluating the safety protocols and the safety needs of multiple clinics, multiple communities, urban, rural. So with that background, how did you learn about DPC and how did you transition to Birchwood?
Yeah, great question. That's a story and a half, right? So I'm glad we're here. How I first learned about DPC was actually while I was at Mayo, and I was transitioning out of the patient safety work and into a role that the CEO and CMO and I just created. We called it Medical Director of Value Analytics and Affordability. And so really where that came from was the work that we were doing in quality, and the work that we were doing was looking at safety. We were looking at outcomes. So how low are patients' A1Cs? How often are they getting their antibiotics preoperatively? That kind of thing. And we're looking at patient satisfaction, but we weren't really looking at cost. And as we think about value as being outcomes plus safety plus service divided by cost, we started to talk about high value care, optimizing those things on the numerator and driving down costs, ultimately increasing value. And so this was at the time where the whole industry was blowing up around HCCs and reimbursing based on how sick patients were and that kind of thing. And so this work that I began was really aimed at looking at what are the metrics out there? Do we even understand how they're put together? How can we influence them so that we know that the metrics that are out there talking about how good we do our jobs are actually reflecting the truth in the data? And that really kind of led to this whole affordability piece and really trying to move the denominator. How do we drive costs down? And so in my research around that work, I came to know a clinic in La Crosse called the Neighborhood Clinic. And so I reached out to the physician there, and I went and shadowed him quite a few times over probably a year and a half or so. And I just loved what he was doing. He was really doing fee for service. He wasn't membership, but it was very reasonable fee for service, not billing insurance at all. And I was amazed. I asked him tons of questions, shadowed him for days, like I said. And I remember asking things like, what do you do when patients can't pay you? And he told me about his fund that he had at the clinic, where he said, if somebody comes in and they give me a check and their check bounces, I call them myself. I don't have my office manager call. I call them myself and I say, hi, this is Doc, and I'm calling to let you know that your check bounced for your recent treatment. And so I want to let you know that the balance has been forgiven and that the next visit for you and all of your immediate family members will be comped. And I want you to just not have this stress in addition to everything else that you're dealing with medically. And I was just blown away by that. Having grown up essentially in industrialized medicine, I was just blown away that he had the ability to do that, and so I knew at the time that this was it. This was that vision that I've had since I was 7 years old. I need to have a clinic like this. At the same time, I was very much sucked into industrialized medicine. I was an assistant professor at Mayo. I was being published in JAMA. I had 3,000 patients. I was really kind of into that mode. And by that time I had 6 children. And so life had changed quite a bit. But then the universe or God or whoever kind of interfered, and a couple of huge things happened in my life. I got sick actually in 2015. And so although I had been a patient here and there for this or that, I really got sick, and I was sick. I ignored it for a few months, and then I started doctoring, and it took probably 9 months for me to get my diagnosis. But I did end up getting diagnosed with a rare, dangerous autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, as I'm sure you know all about. It really changed my life. At the same time, shortly after I got diagnosed, my dad, who was 61 at the time, he got a cough. And as a non-smoker career firefighter, we figured his cough was maybe some bronchitis. But within a week, we knew that he had metastatic lung cancer. And within 5 weeks, he was gone. And those two things really changed my life. It really gave me the wake-up call that I needed to say, Kristen, are you following your own advice that you give patients all the time? Where's this balance? You're getting sick, but you're still working yourself into the ground, starting at 7, finishing at 11 with the notes and the documentation and all of the things that are on our plates when we work in industrialized medicine. And I realized that I wasn't following that advice. And so I did a lot of soul searching, and it ultimately came to I needed to resign from Mayo. And so in doing that, Mayo, as many big clinics do, they had a non-compete clause. So I couldn't work within 150 miles of our home for at least 18 months. And so, here I was sick, needing to change jobs, but now having to move my 6 children and husband and all of that away from my family and friends after we just lost my dad. And so it was a challenging time. I ended up taking a job 3 hours north from where we were living. And we drew a circle on the map and said, I don't want to drive more than 30 minutes to get to work. And we really want to live on a lake if we're going to move north away from everybody. We've never done that before. And we need a house big enough for the 8 of us. And so there was one house in February of 2018 that met those criteria, and it happened to be in Birchwood. And so we moved here, the kids started school, and I started this new job that was intended to be less demanding than Mayo. I'd have more days off and this and that. And so we moved here, and the kids started school, and everything was okay at first, but I was continuing to get sicker and sicker. I still hadn't gotten on the right treatment. And in January of 2019, I saw my rheumatologist, and he said, I want you on 6-hour work days. You can't work more than 6 hours a day. And so I turned in my paperwork and did the whole short-term disability FMLA thing. And 1 week later, I was called into a room and terminated without cause. And of course, it was per the contract, they could do that. And I could also quit on demand, essentially, as it was my first year there. But at that point, I really reached kind of the lowest point in my life. I don't know who I am if I can't be a doctor. It's just part of who I am. And so without that, even with the threat of not having that, because at the time, not only did I now not have a job, but I was quite sick. And so I applied for federal disability at the urging of my doctors. And I began to really kind of think and grapple with all that I had lost due to this illness, this sarcoidosis. It was the lowest point in my life, and after a couple of weeks of feeling bad for myself, I was able to see myself again, kind of through that shroud of not good enough that I tend to get sucked into. And so I immediately began looking for work in the new world of telemedicine that was emerging at the time. And this was early 2019. And so my disability application, interestingly, was approved within 3 weeks, as they had classified me as terminal. And that was a surprise to me on a number of different fronts, because having tried to help patients in years past, it was usually 1, 2, 3 times applying before you could get approved. And so my disability application was approved, but at the same time, I had found and was hired into a full-time role from home, seeing patients virtually before the disability benefits ever kicked in. And so I was very lucky that my disability ended as quickly as it started because I was able to find this new position working from home. And the new position in telemedicine, it offered something that I hadn't really experienced professionally before, which was kindness. They saw us doctors as the humans that we were. I had both of my knees replaced during the first 4 months on that job. And as I did, I felt supported. I was supported. I felt cared for. And I no longer felt vilified for not being the perfect, robotic, always producing, never vulnerable physician that our industrial colleagues are often expected to be. And so in this new environment with my new knees, and then finally finding infliximab or Remicade as the treatment that would drive my sarcoid into remission, I began to get better and better and better. And so when the pandemic hit, I was starting to think about what I'm doing pretty well now. I could go do something. But as an immune compromised doctor now in the middle of a global pandemic, I was working for a company where now all of a sudden we were seeing millions of patients each month. And along with the rest of the country, we're trying to ride the bicycle as we were building it, working tirelessly to get a handle on COVID. And so that kind of derailed my dreaming for a little bit. But by 2021, I had a year of calm, which is kind of ironic given that it was during the height of the pandemic. And so I began to dream again. And I realized after I got sick back in 2015 that all of the times I had been knocked down and then got up, those instances, those events were actually important in some way or another. They were prerequisites to get me to the point I found myself in last year. And so why I picked Birchwood, why we opened in Birchwood, it was very serendipitous. We ended up here having moved for that job back in 2018. And my children were 12 to 22 by the time last year came around. And those student loans had been paid down over now 14 years, and Birchwood had become our home. And so when we decided that the time was right to finally do this and take this leap, it didn't even cross our minds to consider a location other than Birchwood, because that was always the goal, right? To be the town doc, to work where I live, to be like in real community with my patients. And so we made the call last year, April 5th of 2021. And by June 28th, Birchwood Family Medicine was up and running.
Incredible. And I want to ask about Birchwood as a community, what it's like. But before we go there, I want to ask, because what you shared is unfortunately very common, especially during this pandemic, where physicians are threatened with losing their job. They're threatened with, you need to work faster, or then you will lose your job if you don't. They're replaced by people who have far less training in terms of years, patient experience, et cetera. To the listeners, what would you say to people who may or may have not experienced something like that, when you talk about that your value was enmeshed with being a physician versus this place of, I am valued as a person and I am also valued as a physician? How do you challenge people to think about their own lives so that if that ever happens to them, or if they've already been through that and they're still traumatized by that experience, how do you talk to people to help heal that enmeshment that could be happening?
I think there were two main things that kind of brought me through that. One is Brene Brown, and the other is my therapist at the time, if I'm being honest. And he really taught me how to be mindful and how to meditate. And I am Christian. I have a faith practice. I pray and all of that. But mindfulness was something where I was able to focus on the here and now and not worry so much about what other people thought and what other people were telling me, because I knew that I was a good physician. I've been in the 99th percentile nationally. I've never been sued, knock on wood. Like, I eat, sleep, and breathe this, and I'm dedicated to it. And so I knew that. My patients told me that. And so desperate to be validated. I received a lot of that validation from my therapist at the time, who told me, you're not thinking about this wrong. Your advocacy for your patients is noble, or is what you should be doing. It's the oath that you took. And so I felt validated in that way. I think that's one thing. And then the whole thing with Brené Brown, I really came to understand vulnerability and courage. And I looked at those as not points of weakness, but as necessary building blocks towards success. And so she quotes a lot Teddy Roosevelt's, piece about the man in the arena, and it's not the critic who counts. And I have that hanging in my clinic as a reminder to everybody that may be in that position, because as physicians, we know what's right. You've got that gut check. We're always looking out for our patients first and foremost. And when anybody else tries to get in the middle of that doctor-patient relationship, whether it's an insurer, an employer, hospital administration, or the Supreme Court, there is risk there. If you have that fire within where you know that bond, that relationship between doctor and patient is sacred, and you're in an environment or a workplace where that isn't being honored, know that better is possible. And that's the thing. I've seen it and I'm living it now, where better is possible in DPC and out. But it is not necessary to listen to the critics. You can get back up. And I've found that all of those knocks have taught me something, and I am who I am today because of them.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Have you tried an AI scribe in your clinic? Well, I've tried so many, and I can say Heidi Health is the best AI scribe I have come across thus far. With Heidi Health, I can create unlimited customizable templates for my notes to help me truly cut down on the time I'm spending charting. Template for pediatric well child check? Done. Template for weight loss management? Done. Some of my favorite things I've built into my AI template, beyond the general soap note, are having a list of actionables for our team to take after a patient visit, having the diagnoses listed, and creating an after-visit summary for our patients. Not only have I found Heidi Health to be the most helpful, customizable AI scribe so far, it's also more affordable than most out there. So try Heidi Health today and see how you can harness the power of an AI scribe for your practice. To get an entire month of Heidi Pro free, go to the homepage of mydpcstory.com and click on the Heidi Health ad. Amazing. And when you talk about the vulnerability, it just makes me think about, one, your experience, 9 months to get to diagnosis for yourself, even though you were a Mayo physician. And when you mentioned Brené Brown, this idea that you talk about, that she mentions vulnerability, there's one thing that she talks about where she gave her, I think it was her first public speech, and then she was afraid of reading the comments because it would make her really afraid to potentially to go out there again. But then she talks about vulnerability is a tool that can help us affect our community, affect our own lives. And like you've shared with your story, I think about if you had a patient with something that was very difficult to figure out in a initial set of labs or whatever, with the patient history, that a person harnessing their vulnerability, especially as a DPC physician with the autonomy and the time, the vulnerability can help us always be empathetic with our patients and always fight as if the patients were us.
Yes.
So in terms of thinking outside of the box, thinking about who in my network can I contact to try to get this person help sooner? Can we do telemedicine? Can we do options like that? I think that taking what Brené Brown has said, taking what you've shared, and highlighting that vulnerability in medicine is absolutely a tool that is imperative for us to have as physicians. It's really important to never forget that. And when you talk about and just bringing back into light that idea that a person's identity is wrapped up in medicine, that the medicine is not what makes us vulnerable. It's our person and our experiences and our interactions with each other that creates that vulnerability. And so I think that that's really something that I challenge people to think about if they're really valuing themselves only because they are physicians.
Right. Absolutely. And I've really come to understand that in this last year, thinking about the clinic, reading our Google reviews, seeing that patients are receiving our care in the way that we intend to give it gives me immense pride, as well as these paired gifts of peace and joy, because I know that I'm effectively helping people every day. And I knew that I helped people in other settings, but it's different. The depth of the help is much bigger, and the dependability, the safety, the reassurance that my patients know that if something happens, they can page me, they can call me, and I will connect with them within minutes. I tell them all the time, if I'm doing my job right, you'll never find yourself in urgent care, just in the way that our clinic runs. And being able to walk that talk and then get feedback from patients that it's effective is the best gift I've ever been given. It's something where I get up in the morning, I want to go to work. I love being here, to the point where I have all teenagers now. So sometimes I even escape here. This is my quiet and calm place. So yes.
Amazing. And just hearing that you're happy, it's so different from that 7 to 11 mentality and that type of schedule that many of us can relate to. On that note, I want to ask about Birchwood now. Can you explain, where is Birchwood in Wisconsin? What's the population like, and how far are you from the nearest DPC?
Yeah, good question. Birchwood I had honestly never heard of it. Grew up here, lived here all of my life, and had never heard of Birchwood prior to moving here. It's a town of about 450 people. So it's actually a village. And then the village is inside of a town that spans a larger geographic area, but still is very sparsely populated. So we're in Northwest Wisconsin. We're about 2.5 hours northeast of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and about an hour and 40 minutes due south of Duluth, or an hour and 15 minutes northeast of Eau Claire. And so Birchwood is really a resort community. It's the place that you go on vacation to with your extended family to, quote, hang out in the woods, So we're located on the Chautauqua chain of lakes, and there's wildlife everywhere. I see deer and bear and fox and turkeys every week. Plenty of outdoor activities year round. Fishing is huge. There's a billion lakes, lots of ATV trails, UTV trails, snowshoeing, hiking, hunting, all sorts of different things, snowmobiles. In town, the little village, we've got 2 gas stations. I think we've got about 4 restaurants now, a post office where my husband works. We've got a school, which actually has about 450 students. And so it's a really good school. They draw in students from several outlying communities. And so we have K through 12, and then also a Montessori and charter school. And then there's some businesses ever growing. I think this summer we're getting a Dollar General as well as a florist. So that's the talk of the town these days. But yeah, that is Birchwood.
Amazing. I was waiting for Pomida or Shopco to be dropped in there.
Oh no, we're not that fancy. We have to drive half hour to get to something like that. But yeah, so absolutely. It's a fun place to be.
In terms of you going to Birchwood, opening your clinic, and then starting to get patients enrolled, how was the adoption in your community like, given that you are a good distance away from other communities that have DPC in them?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, from Birchwood, whether you're going north, east, south, or west, it's a 30-minute drive to get to any other healthcare, whether it's a chiropractor or a clinic or a hospital. And so a lot of people are like, why Birchwood? But this is home. This is where we live. So to that end, opening here, there were a couple of different hurdles. Number one, I'd never practiced here. At Mayo, when I left Mayo, I had close to 3,000 patients. And so, oh man, I am so jealous of those DPC docs that open where they've been before to some degree, because I know I'd be full like that. In fact, when I first opened last year, I had a little open house, and some of my patients from Mayo, where I left 5 years ago, drove up for it. And
Whoa.
So that was super sweet. Yes. But in any case, so I've had quite a bit of educating to do. Number one, what is direct primary care? That's still a hurdle. We've come a long way using talking opportunities, and we won an award with the county this year and on the radio and different things like that. But what is direct primary care? So educating them about that, kind of getting over that hurdle of, if I want to go to the doctor, I have to use my insurance, or I don't have insurance, so I can't go to the doctor. Trying to get away from that thought process, which is, I would say, deeply ingrained up here because they've never seen anything like direct primary care before. So that whole piece has been interesting. And then the other piece is trying to help patients understand and really learn myself by working with other groups. It's not DPC or insurance. How can these two things work closely together? I've actually come to know 3 different health share or insurance brokerage companies that help find wraparound policies and protection for patients for that 10 to 20% of their care that we can't do here. And so there's been that piece. Then it's introducing the area to me as a physician. What's my practice style like? What services do I provide? Who do I take care of? All of those different things. And so it's been a lot of work, but overall, I'm thrilled with how we're doing. We've had a lot, and we continue to have a lot of hurdles to overcome, but overall, we're doing great. We opened last year, June 28th, with 0 patients. And so I knew, and I thought back to that neighborhood clinic. I remember the doc there told me that first year, I remember there were days where I would just sit there and stare at the door and hope someone comes through or calls. And he said, and then after, for him, 2-3 years, all of a sudden it got busy, and now he's got 6 clinics regionally. And so I kept thinking about that and reminding myself that nothing worth doing in this world is easy generally. And so we opened June 28th, and then we had our first patient member join 4 days later, a lovely young woman who would become a top fan of ours on social media and be a selfless cheerleader of the clinic. And now, less than a year later, we've got 164 patient members and continue to grow by about 10 to 20% a month. So it's slower than I had hoped, but my hopes were based on expectations after researching what the norm is nationally, and being rural and just geographically here, it's unique. And so I'm very happy with how we're doing, and just can't wait to continue to grow.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because especially for people who, you brought up 2 great points, who are not opening DPC where they've been practicing, where they're known, and
Yes.
rural locations. Because as Dr. Filescu says, and I think he said this in his podcast, that you can open up DPC anywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember that first job that I took after I was terminated without cause, and I met other physicians there that were doing telemedicine, but almost everybody had something else. And so many of the something else's were DPC clinics. And I remember talking with one of my colleagues, and he said, all you need is a stethoscope. Like, you don't need a fancy exam table. You don't need this or that. No, the OCPD part of me was not cool with just a stethoscope. Like, I needed to be more prepared, but lots and lots of encouragement once I got tapped into that DPC community about, you can do this. This is doable. And so that was huge. I needed that encouragement in order to pull the trigger.
So, and with you sharing your growth, who are the people in your community who've joined your practice?
I looked at that, and before today, just to kind of get a refresher, right now, the majority of our patients are adults, 142 are adults, but we've got 22 kids, some babies, which is really fun. I think the youngest person that joined our clinic was 6 days old, and our oldest is close to 90. So that's awesome. More than half identify as female, about 42% identify as male. And one thing I was surprised to find is that it's about split in thirds. So about a third of our patients are not insured at all. About a third have commercial insurance, some of whom are lucky and have good policies. Others, most of them are underinsured with their commercial policies. And then about a third that are either Medicaid or Medicare. That's kind of how it's shaken out so far. It's been cool. I think people kind of watched at first, and then after about 6 to 9 months of success and just kind of seeing things grow and grow, various community leaders have joined. And then shortly thereafter, their entire families have joined. And so that's been really nice to start to feel like we belong here, which is cool.
And you do, absolutely, because over 100 people have found that access to care and access to you as their personal physician matters. So that's just incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been so fun. It's been so fun.
One of the things that I discovered when I was zooming in on your clinic geographically is you're right across the street from the senior center. So I want to ask, has the senior center geographically being so close to you helped bring attention to your practice?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The senior center is awesome. And I did not know about its awesomeness prior to opening the clinic. And so I first really learned about all of it just earlier this year in January or so. A couple had joined, and the wife of the couple, she goes to the senior center all the time and would comment often about how she came right from yoga. And so I asked her about it, and she told me all about it and then invited me to come to book club one day. And so I went and met with about 6 or 7 women and just kind of listened to their stories and who they were and what they liked about the senior center, the community that they found there, and then answered questions about direct primary care and how the clinic works. It was very helpful and very kind for them to invite me, just because I think those were some of the leaders of the senior center. And so then they started talking to their friends, and from there they invited me to a luncheon where I was able to address close to like 100 seniors in the area and even better understand the way that it works. And following that, yes, I have had new patients establish. About 35% of my new patients come in on word of mouth recommendations. And it's been a nice two-way street, because in turn, then I left that luncheon and came back and messaged all of my patients saying, hey, by the way, you guys should know about this. By it being named the senior center, it sounds kind of like it's for convalescent folks or very elderly people, but actually it's just a social club for people who are 55 or older. They get together and they do quilting, aerobics, yoga, dominoes, bingo, cribbage, crafts, all sorts of stuff. And they have daily meals, hot meals that people can come and have there, I think for like $2, or they can come and get it to go, take home a hot meal. They even have an on-site cook. So it's been cool. And that's just a taste of the community involvement that we've been able to start to have as we approach our 1-year anniversary, which makes our lives richer as care providers in the community. But then also it just helps us serve people better because we know where to point them to.
Awesome. And can you give us a picture as to what your typical week is like?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I would say changes is the typical thing, right? So we're always changing and growing. When I first started and opened last year, I was on my own. It was just me. I was doctor, nurse, receptionist, phlebotomist, manager, all of it. And I made the decision when we decided to open that I wasn't going to finance this because of my own personal disability and having lost, all of that. Like, we weren't in a great place financially anymore. And so I didn't want to go into a bunch of debt by starting the clinic. And so what I did was changed telemedicine jobs, and I started working for an awesome group out of New York. And that job has basically allowed me to fund the start of this clinic. And so in the beginning, when we first opened, I was working 40 hours a week with my other job. And so I would often come to clinic, and we started out here Monday through Friday, 10 to 3, just because I didn't have any patients, I didn't want to be here all the time with no one coming in the door, but wanted to be available. And so I would come here and do my other job. And as we grew, I started to pare down my hours at the telemedicine job a little bit. Actually got down to 20 hours a week there. But then around December, after about 6 months in, I reached this point where I was like, okay, I'm starting to completely have no wax left in my candle. I'm burning it at both ends. I need to do something. And so my husband and I talked, and we decided, you know what, let's increase my hours at the telemedicine job, which sounds crazy, but then I can hire somebody and bring somebody in to take all the administrative stuff that I was doing. So now I can do just doctor stuff at the clinic. And so I did that. I increased my hours. And then just in March, 3 months ago, I was able to hire a partner, and she's not a physician or provider, but she's incredible. She's a Jill of all trades, if you will. She worked as an MA in the Navy. She's a medical lab tech and ran labs for years, instructed at the technical college on phlebotomy and MA classes. And then she also has a master's degree in health and wellness management. Since bringing her on board, she's allowed me to exhale. She now runs the lab. She rooms patients. She answers the phone. It's been a dream come true because she, like me, she has the fire. She has the drive. She sees the vision. And she's okay with being my chaos coordinator as we kind of live into year 2 here. That having been said, we've spent the last few months taking all of the protocols and processes that were in my head and getting them onto the computer and kind of dotting our I's and crossing our T's, if you will. And so now we've morphed into this new schedule where we're here from 8 until 4 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then we're here from 8 until 7 on Tuesdays, so that I could have her longer during those days. We moved to virtual Fridays. So I see patients virtually on Fridays. She has the day off. And then I'm open officially one Saturday a month too, with the caveat that if you're a patient member and you need me, I'm here for you. So we'll meet however, wherever, whenever, depending on the situation. So that's kind of how we've been running things lately. I still am working at this other job, and I hope to be able to grow to the point where I don't have to work there as much anymore. I haven't been able to pay myself yet, which is fine. It's choices I've made as we're dealing with limited funds, but that will come as I move into year 2 here. And ultimately, the goal is to only be here, of course.
Wonderful. And even just you're mentioning how you brought somebody else on and then the workflows even changed. Even with you a year out, I really think that's important for people to hear, because having the autonomy to practice the way you want to practice definitely includes practice management, and having the ability to have the time to evaluate your workflows and then fix them as they need to be fixed to adjust to your patients and your community is important. So with that said, what kinds of workflows really help your clinic function, and how have those workflows adjusted, whether it be bringing on this new person or whether it be based on the volume of patients?
Yeah. So like I said, change is the norm. So when I first started, I signed on with Elation EMR and Hint to help with practice management, membership management, and Spruce to help with communication. It was definitely a challenge for some of my patients that are less tech savvy, because at first I was here alone. And so I couldn't be answering phones while I was seeing patients. There was a lot of returning calls and messaging in Spruce and all of that kind of thing. And being the only one here, having to teach them how to use Spruce and why we use Spruce and why we don't just text and, that kind of a thing. It was a lot. And so having her here, I'm now able to be with patients either face-to-face or virtually on the computer, or I'm working for my patients. So I'm researching something that they asked me about. I'm looking up to double check and triple check that I'm still up to date on the latest and greatest of this or that. And so I'm doing work that only I can do while Rebecca is answering phones, checking inventory, dealing with people who walk through the door, explaining what DPC is, all of those things. So that's been a huge change. We've also been able to better adapt for patients that are not tech lovers. And so having that consistency with answering the phone, Spruce has been nice. There's automated workflows and different ways where messages can get routed directly to her if it's about membership or billing, and they can get routed directly to me if it's about a refill or a medical question. So those types of things. Rebecca's very organized. And so she took my folders of disorganized handouts and all these different things, and we've made so many different filing systems and color code systems and just tons of different workflows, which I'm grateful to her for, because when you're trying to play all those roles as one person, you're dealing with the things that are on fire, and all the rest gets put to the side for when I have a minute. And now, like you said, there's been time to evaluate our workflows, make templates, make handouts, do things that really serve patients, but serve them efficiently so that we can serve even more patients. So that's been huge.
Something that I found really helps when a person is a micro practice or there's very few staff or there's, a virtual person and you're doing all the clinical work is if you know that something's coming down the pipeline, like flu season, allergy season, whatever it is, to, like you said, you had all of these files and things that needed to be organized, but they were there. I want to highlight, start somewhere. If you have something that you love, just put it, and then it always can be organized. But help your future self in terms of at least saving those resources. I think recently I saved something on when we were first starting to have the formula shortages. There were multiple resources out there to say, like, this is the equivalent of a non-Abbott formula. And you never know when you're going to need those things, but just start somewhere is what I definitely encourage people to do, especially if you're working by yourself or with one or few, like with another staff person or somebody who's not medically trained. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Even this summer, I hired one of my daughters and her friends, and they don't do anything with patients. They don't see patients. They're not even here when patients are here. But what they do is they're organizing my Google Drive, they're organizing my handouts, they're checking to make sure if I need more handouts, they're laminating things. They're really doing a lot of these things that are helping the clinic that I see in my head be the clinic that I walk into every day.
Awesome. And something that you had mentioned, I believe it was on social media, that I wanted to highlight is the use of macros. So you have a system where, and I'm very biased because I use the same system. When you talk about maximizing the time that you have to put out those fires, having the burden of proper documentation goes away in DPC in terms of like the 14-point review of systems is negative other than as mentioned in HPI, that part is gone. But having the necessary documentation to help us think about our patients for follow-ups, et cetera, for referrals, how do you maximize using things like macros to then be able to have less time with documentation and more time with your patients?
Yeah, that's something I'm still definitely working on. I'll tell you, I've really enjoyed listening to these podcasts because I am part of DPC groups on Facebook, and I go to like hint summits and weekly, meetings and ideas and all these different things when I can. But I've been listening to these podcasts as I've been working at times, and I just have all these Post-its of notes that I've taken from other DPC docs with great ideas. And so I find one thing I recently realized about myself is that I am still stuck in the thought process that I have to write one of those notes on every patient that I see. And I have to remind myself, like, no, you don't. Like, you don't have to. As long as you're communicating what's going on to yourself, to the patient, and to any consultant that might touch the note, you're okay. And so just today, I listened to one of your episodes where one of the docs was talking about a template that she uses where the patient gets a copy and walks out the door with it, and they just scan it into the chart. And I thought to myself, well, I got to look more into that, and maybe we'll start doing that. And that's the beautiful thing about owning your own practice is I can change anytime I want to. And so it's a learning curve when you've worked 17 years in industrial medicine. And then when you hire somebody who's worked 17 years in industrial medicine, we find ourselves often being like, okay, is that the way we have to do things because there's a law or a regulation about it? Or is that the way we think we have to do things because that's all we've ever known? And so we're always looking these things up and trying to figure it out and talking to our colleagues who've been doing this for a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 more than we have.
Now, I want to ask about being in a rural area, being in a county that was different from outside of Madison. Were there any funky county-specific requirements that you had to learn about and follow when you opened Birchwood Family Medicine?
I'm going to say no, not really. And so when we decided to open in April of 21, I knew nothing about business. I've never owned a business. My mom owned a quilt shop that she co-owned with 3 people. So I grew up kind of around business in that way. And my husband has a business degree, but he hasn't owned a business, so very, very naive about the business side of this. And so I have a lawyer who I rely on when I have questions. And then I actually hired a consultant group last spring to help me launch. I wanted to make sure I was doing everything that I needed to be doing, but I was also doing everything the most intelligent way I could be doing it to not waste money or time, both of which I was always short on. So I hired a consultant group and they really shepherded me through the entire process. And so this is how you opt out of Medicare. This is how you register for this or that in the state as a business owner, and taxes and all of the different things that I never had to consider before as a physician. So through that, I can't say that there was anything that I was surprised about that the county required, other than I can look back a year later and say, I wish I would have had more local guidance. So I joined the Birchwood Chamber of Commerce, and through that have met some people, but I still don't feel like I'm really in the know as far as the business community. Definitely getting to be in the know. So I discovered probably about 6 months in that there's actually a Washburn County Economic Development Resource Group. And so the gentleman that leads that, I was actually asked to come and give a talk at a group that they were sponsoring. So other business owners in Washburn County. And so got to know some folks through that. And then a couple of months ago was honored, surprised, but was honored with the Innovative Business of the Year award that this group put out. And so that was really cool. But in learning about them kind of after the fact, I learned that they have mentoring opportunities and grants and all sorts of stuff that they help new business owners with that I didn't even know to tap into. And I think part of that was because I was being guided by a national organization that is out east, and because we were relatively new to town, having only lived here 3 years, when we opened. But as far as requirements, not so much.
Gotcha. And in addition to what you just shared, what other tips would you have for people who are looking to do rural DPC in the future?
Oh my gosh, there's a couple of different things I think that I've really learned. And I do think that one can prepare better than I prepared or more. I've always kind of been in a hurry, like a race to get stuff done, never compromising quality, but always just like, can we do this now? Why do we have to wait? So I could have prepared more. You have to be, it's a 100% requirement. You have to be willing to go out on a limb. It's scary to do this. It's risky in some aspects, but if you believe in it, and there are patients out there, which there always are, I think you could be successful in a DPC anywhere. I really think that this is a model that could get us out of the mess that we're in American healthcare today. It's been so awesome to see how many specialty and ancillary groups are out there doing the same kind of direct work. I was shocked. We are in a tiny, tiny town, but I have echoes, ultrasounds, and x-rays that come and are done in clinic. I have a lab courier every day. I can get direct pricing on surgeries and invasive radiologic tests and all sorts of different things. And so it's been fun to kind of be a part of that. But on the flip side, it still is risky because we're all kind of new at this. And the other piece of it is just that when you're the only doctor for miles, whether or not you're a family physician or an emergency medicine physician, you're going to deal with stuff that is unexpected. We try really hard to educate patients that we are a primary care clinic. We're not an urgent care. Yes, we provide urgent care to our patient members, but we're not an urgent care just for whoever to come to. We're really membership based. And we try really hard to educate our patients on what requires a call to 911 and what's an urgent issue and when should you page me, that type of thing. But even with all that planning, we've had people walk in our door with PEs or walk in our door bleeding from their head. There's always something. And so you've got to be willing to have that little bit of Wild West, to your practice. The other thing that's really unique about rural medicine is in traditional industrial medicine, I remember whole classes in training about boundaries and not getting too close to your patients and not socializing with your patients and having these rules that are set and in place. And that all changes in a rural setting. Yes, there are still rules and boundaries and all of those things, but when you live with these people, you're going to see them every day out and about. You're going to see them when you don't have makeup on and your hair's pulled back, or when you're the one on running for your kid to have stitches, or whatever, church, school, grocery store. And so being prepared for that, both to be on in those settings that are maybe unexpected, and then also having language where you're keeping yourself in check. You're not administering care in the middle of the cereal aisle, but rather saying, you know what, let's go to the clinic, or can you come in the morning, or working with them so that we can get them the care that they need. Flexibility and innovation is key in rural medicine. Oftentimes we're called to find alternative ways of treating things, whether that's due to lack of resources or a long drive to get the care that you otherwise would need. But if you can meet people with that flexibility and innovation, I find that the possibilities are endless. So many people are like blown away when I tell them that, yes, I do home visits. And they're just like, what? But it's such a joy to be able to do that. And of course, there's boundaries and guidelines around that as well. But being able to go into somebody's home when they invite you in, and they do that because they know that they aren't able to come to you. They're putting themselves in a vulnerable position just by making that request. And so being able to meet them there and normalize it and thank them for inviting you in and then providing care to them, I get goosebumps still. I just love that part of it.
Just incredible. And thank you so much, Dr. Dall-Winther, for sharing your story and for proving that better is possible every single day in your practice.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Next week, look forward to hearing from Dr. Buzz Hollander in Kamuela, Hawaii. If you've enjoyed the podcast and you haven't yet done so, subscribe today and share the episode with a physician you may know who needs to hear about DPC. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify now, as well, as it helps others to find all these DPC stories. Lastly, be sure to follow us on social media. If you're wanting to continue learning more about DPC in the meantime, check out dpcnews.com. Until next week, this is Marielle Concepcion.